Well, welcome to the first session of West End Resilience Live. We're here to celebrate the strength, the resilience, and indeed, most importantly of all, the future of the West End. Over the coming weeks, we're going to be bringing together businesses and employees during these unprecedented times. The aim of these webinars is to bring you a selection of inspiring speakers to offer those working remotely or on furlough, stimulating and engaging information and ideas, while keeping you informed about the trends and the policies that will help shape the future of the West End. Now, before we get properly started, I'm going to hand over to Jace Tyrrell, Chief Executive of the new West End company, which represents the 600 businesses who operate in the West End. Over to you, Jace.
Martin, thank you very much indeed. And thank you to the hundreds of our members, our partners and our friends of the West End that have joined us this afternoon for our inaugural West End Resilience Live. Now, I want to start by really paying tribute to the remarkable response of everyone across the West End as we've been dealing with this health and economic crisis that we're going through. Particularly when we started out 6 weeks ago, the shutdown, literal shutdown of the West End, with the store staff, the retail staff really at the sharp end of doing that. Of course, there are still businesses open in the West End, from our grocery stores and also our pharmacies, who are working flat out to support the local community through this period. Also to our restaurants, our bars and hotels in the West End, who are doing incredible work on the volunteering side and supporting a lot of local initiatives with the City Council and the London volunteering work. To our frontline security personnel that are still operating in the West End, to the facilities managers, the property managers, the investment and property teams thinking about our recovery, really to everyone that's involved right across our area, a heartfelt thank you from all of us at New West End Company as we work through this. Now, our theme each week is around the West End resilience. Resilience is a deliberate choice of theming for us. When we think about resilience at New West End Company and came up with this idea with our West End family, it really is thinking about three areas of resilience. And firstly is how the West End can be resilient when it comes out of this, and how we're going to work with our customers and employees to bring them back to the area. It's also how your businesses in the West End can continue to be resilient as we enter a very new normal as we come out of this, and how we, all of us at New West End Company, can support you through that. And thirdly, and most importantly, which is why the theme of today is around this, is you. Your own personal resilience as we go through an extraordinary time, and really the mental and physical wellness of our entire West End family, which is around 150,000 people, which is the people that work here and the people that live here, the 25,000 residents as well, and how we can support each other. So I'm really pleased with our partners at Microsoft that the very first topic of our session today is around personal resilience. And really, I thank you for joining us, and back over to Martin.
Jace, thank you. Now, in a moment, I will be introducing our first guest. But before we do that, we want to hear from you. We want you to engage in this webinar, to be able to put your questions to our guests and to get responses from her. And you can do that very easily through the Teams app. If you just basically hover your mouse around the bottom of the Teams app and window, you'll see there's a question mark there. If you just click on that, that will enable you to ask questions, and we'll be doing those questions, putting those questions to Helen after she's made her presentation. So any dramatic shift in our lives can be a cause for worry, anxiety, and of course have an impact on our broader health. And our first speaker is Helen Keeble. Helen is head of HR for the commercial partner team at Microsoft UK and leads their mental wellbeing strategy. She's been with Microsoft for nearly 7 years. She's a mental health first aider herself, and Helen has worked with the business to normalise the topic of mental health. Helen, over to you.
Thank you very much, Martin, and I'm delighted to be here. Let me start by saying that I started out as an enthusiastic amateur in many ways, with some academic knowledge in the field of mental health and a reasonable personal awareness, but I am not here as an expert by any means. I am a practitioner, and I'd love to share with you a little about what we've learned in Microsoft going through this pandemic, in the hopes that some of it may resonate with you, or perhaps create an opportunity for you to think about the mental wellbeing in your organisations. If I could have the next slide. It might be useful to share a little context about our mental health strategy at Microsoft first. Like many companies do, and I'm sure your organisations do, we've already had some mental health provisions in place as part of our overall wellbeing strategy, but it probably wasn't something that we talked very much about in the company. And it was a few years ago when our UK CEO at the time shared a story about resilience in an all-hands meeting, in recognition really of the fact that people were struggling to find a balance between their work and their personal lives, that we really started to put some more structure around the dialogue and around what we wanted to do. And after a really lengthy period of debate around the pros and cons of words like resilience and words like health, we landed on the term mental well-being and developed a two-pillar approach to the topic. And sitting here now in the middle of such unprecedented times, I can really only be grateful that we took the approach that we did. Next slide, please. The first two pillars of the two pillars is how do we support people who find themselves in need of help because they find themselves facing a mental health issue. What is the reactive help that we can really give them, and how do we create an environment where they feel that they can ask for help? We know statistically that around 1 in 4 people in the UK will have a mental health challenge at any one point, but we also know that very few will tell their employers. So how do we ensure that that provision is always available for them? The second pillar is really about how do we encourage people to think about their mental well-being in the same way that they think about their physical well-being. We all know what to do to stay physically well. We may self-sabotage sometimes, but when we do that, we make informed choices. So how do we apply the same principles to our mental well-being that we do with our physical well-being, knowing that actually, whilst our physiology is very similar, our mental well-being needs are all very unique. So we had this strategy and we were running activity around it. And then we have a global pandemic, we have lockdowns, we have furlough on the news, we have job losses on the news. But as Emily Maitlis said really succinctly, I thought in Newsnight the other week, this has really shown us that it isn't a great leveller, and the consequences of what's happening around us are not the same for everybody. And I should say at this point that at Microsoft, we feel quite privileged because we already had the tools and equipment for the vast majority of our workforce to work from home. And in reality, we are in an industry that can weather this storm, and we recognise that many others aren't. But even with that said, there are still mental health impacts for all of our employees as well. So I'd love to take you through a few of the challenges that we see and that we're facing, knowing that your challenges may be different, but they may also be the same. And really, as I go through these, the focus is on that second pillar. It's around how we help people to stay mentally well, because in many ways, ensuring a pathway for reactive help is the easiest of the challenges that we face at present. If I could have the next slide. So I'll talk through 4 different groups, and that first group is really those home workers with families or caregiver responsibility. And at Microsoft, one of our strengths has also turned out to be one of our weaknesses, really. And that ability that I talked about earlier, that our employees have had to work from home before COVID-19, has really meant that some have struggled to manage their time between home and between work. The flexibility that we've given people historically means that they're used to being at home and completing full hours, full workload. And they could do that in the way that they felt worked best for them. And for many of them, they worked very long hours to do that. And it created a real sense of commitment to do the work. When you then introduce very suddenly the introduction of family care into that dynamic, our people are sometimes really struggling to continue to achieve at the level that they did before with this additional extra responsibility on top. And our message to that has had to be very clear. It isn't possible. And so really the focus is about how do we reprioritise to the most important work achieving what work you can do, when you can do it, but in a way that doesn't create anxiety around managing family. And to do that, we've had to really place the accountability in the hands of our people themselves, because they are the ones best placed to demonstrate the art of the possible and to work out what they feel is and isn't achievable for them. And we have to recognise that for some people, it's simply not possible. And as well as being able to say to them, well, actually, if you just can't do it, you may need to take some time out to be able to work out what your family responsibilities and family needs are. We've also introduced the catchy titled Pandemic School Closure Caregiver Leave, because what we heard from our employees is that for some of them, they didn't want an either I'm working with lower priorities or I'm not working. They wanted a level of flexibility that they could agree with their manager to shift their patterns in a way that met their individual needs. For the second group, that's about home workers who don't have families or caregiver responsibility. I think we, like many other organisations, swung into action fairly quickly to ensure that we had a response for school closures. But it took us a little longer to realise that the pressure and impact on those that live home alone was different, but just as real. Living on your own in isolation can be deeply debilitating emotionally, and it's dangerous, and perhaps we were in a position of possibly creating assumptions that life was easier for those who didn't have young children. But in fact, thriving on social interaction at work, when that is suddenly missing day to day, that can be extraordinarily challenging for people. Whether that's for those perhaps earlier in career who may be living in isolation in studio flats, or those living far away from their families, the need to acknowledge that every person with or without children is facing their own challenge to find some level of equilibrium has been deeply appreciated, even just by verbalising that to our people and not making some of the assumptions about the experience of each individual person. For this community, really creating virtual groups and virtual hubs has taken on a life of its own. And whether that's around virtual treasure hunts or bringing your pet to work sessions or virtual pub quizzes, you know, those things may feel frivolous, but actually for those people who are living on their own in isolation, a sense of community has become absolutely critical, as has the need for a sense of humour throughout it. I think the third group is really around those who have experienced significantly increased workloads. And for us, whilst all of our employees and all of our workforce have a role to play in helping our customers and our partners deal with what lies ahead, for some, the day-to-day activity that they're facing has dramatically increased. And that might be because of who they work with or the specifics of the role that they do. But the level of pressure that these people can put themselves under is immense, particularly if they are working with the NHS or customers that are particularly frontline. They can carry the weight of those customers on their shoulders. And how we enable those individuals to really be more vulnerable has never had more importance, really. And for us, that's about how we're engaging our managers and asking our managers to role model the art of prioritising, knowing that we can't have people do it all. There just isn't enough bandwidth to do that. So how do we prioritise the most important work, delivering what is absolutely necessary, and where we can, letting go of the need to be perfect. It's asking our managers to really coach, to check in frequently and help employees to recognise when they're in fact creating those pressures for themselves and it's not something that anybody else is asking of them. And I guess most of all, it's asking managers to really care, to step in when people can't spot that they need a pause, that they are perhaps at a challenging point. And for those people, really, that's one of the reasons that we chose not to change our annual leave policies. We know that annual leave right now will feel very different. It isn't the same as it's been before. It may not be going to the coast or, you know, or going on holiday with your friends, but actually, when workloads are high, even in this environment, a different type of break is still a break that is needed as much as ever. And then we have a final group of employees, and that's those employees whose workloads may have reduced. And it's through no fault of their own. It's to do with the customers that they have or the workload that they're working on. And for them, that can create a sense of guilt, perhaps, that they aren't doing more. They may see some of their colleagues really under pressure and they're not in a position to be able to share some of that burden because of their skill set. But that can also create a real sense of anxiety for them about their roles going forward, and frankly, too much time to think. And for those employees, really, it's about providing as much reassurance as we're in a position to, including talking about adjusting expectations of them, adjusting what we will be thinking when we come to looking at their overall annual performance, those sorts of things, reassuring them that we are really taking each individual person's context into account as we work with them, and sharing channels about how to keep them occupied, how to keep the lines of communication open in a way that really isn't without judgment, so that actually they can find opportunities to hook into their own sense of purpose, whether that's being volunteers or connecting with charities or whatever, that really enables them to feel that they are still connected to the bigger picture. I think for everybody, we've created, as many organisations have, guides on how to work from home, even though in theory, everybody at Microsoft already knows. It's that one-stop shop where they can access information on how to spot anxiety and where you go if you spot it, right through to exercises you can do in your living room, to ensuring you manage your daily news consumption to something that is not going to cause you extra anxiety. Those kinds of guides are hugely helpful, and they provide that single reference point for support for when people really need it. And we're running a variety of other things, such as webinars and virtual seminars. For example, we have a morning and an evening virtual daily mindfulness session. We have sessions for managers on helping their teams manage stress, through to external speakers talking about how you engage with your children through a pandemic, because this is stuff that people have never really had to think about. And people are welcome to join those if they want or not. But I would say that the best mental wellbeing advice that we're seeing within Microsoft is actually not coming from me, it's coming from our people. It's where individuals are setting up whatever forums they feel they want to and supporting each other without that level of judgment. And I think it's also really coming from managers accepting that the first 5 to 10 minutes of every meeting may well be about talking about lockdown, pandemic, the news in a very chatty, informal way, and that's okay. That is not time wasted. That's about creating connections and being able to share something that we're all in that feels very, very different, and then be able to move on to the topic at hand for whatever that meeting is. It's really about creating that climate to enable our people to surface their emotions, and that's something that our managers are doing really well. And on that final slide, I think I would say, I don't know whether our reactive mental health provision will see an increased usage after this. And maybe counterintuitively, I hope that we do see an increase in people accessing our reactive provision, because it's a sign that people are accessing the help that they need. Because undoubtedly going through this, people will need additional support. I do know that as we come towards May and Mental Health Awareness Week, where I always do a host of activity within the organisation, I am going to struggle for things to talk about, because there really is likely to be very little that hasn't already been said. The press has been amazing in the sorts of stories that it has shared around how to support your mental well-being and mental health. But if this pandemic does nothing else, it is creating an environment where certainly talking about our mental health has become much more normalised than it was before. And for me, I'd have to say that I hope that continues long after lockdown ends. So I would leave you with a message that really, for everybody, it's okay to not be okay, particularly during a pandemic. Martin, I'll hand back to you.
Helen, thank you for that. Some interesting food for thought there. Just a reminder, we want your questions. You can do that via the app, via the Teams window that you're actually watching this webinar right now through. And if you just scroll down to the bottom of the screen or the window where you've got the app open, you'll see there's a little question mark there, and that's what you need to click on to be able to ask questions to Helen. I've actually got one here from John. And it is a very simple one. How can managers step in and help if they're on or being furloughed? I mean, I'm not sure if you've got any thoughts on that, Helen. It's a difficult one if they've been furloughed, because of course part of the reality of being furloughed is you aren't able to work. Is there any advice or thoughts that you would offer to them?
Yes, and I mean, that's not a situation that we've currently found ourselves in within Microsoft. I think there are definitely some restrictions on what you should and shouldn't be doing during furlough. So what I would say is that if there is a manager on furlough, they should probably be taking their advice from their organisation, their HR team, around whether they can engage in any discussions. But actually, the experience of the employees who are currently working will probably be far more relevant. And I think what we're really beginning to see is that while managers play a really vital role in supporting employees through this kind of environment around prioritising, the mental well-being support is actually not coming so much from manager community. It's coming from the peers around each other. So what I would say is ensuring that people are tapping into their peer support is probably as important than anything else.
Question here from Paul. What if we've been furloughed? We're not just stuck at home. We have got nothing to do. You know, that is the reality for an awful lot of people, isn't it?
Yes, and I think, as I say, we haven't got that scenario, but we do have people with significantly reduced workloads, and so for those people, what we know and what research tells us is that a sense of purpose is hugely important, and engaging in your daily job, it takes up so much of our lives that in reality that is a core part of what gives us a sense of purpose. And so much of the mental health advice that's out there, whether you are working or not working, is about creating a sense of routine, because that is the thing that really gives us a sense of normality as we go through our daily lives, particularly in a normal working life. So whether your workload is reduced or whether you haven't got any work at the moment, trying to find a way to create a sense of routine is really one of the pieces of advice that really help us create sense of our day. And whether that routine means that you are engaging in some external charity work, or whether you're creating a new hobby, or whether you're, engaging with friends in a very different way, that there is a very clear sense of getting up at a normal time, ensuring that you are going through your day, you're having your breaks, you're having your meals at a regular time. Even if it's as little as scheduling in the time that you are going to catch up with your friends, so you are creating some level of calendar for yourself, or if that calendar includes doing some things for the local community, whatever it is, it's about creating that level of routine that really will help you. You might be putting into your sense of routine gaming or reading or whatever it is, but it is about how you create a sense of pattern to really enable each day to have a sense of meaning and a sense of purpose for you.
Let's cross to this one here from Julie. Does talking about our mental health have a negative impact on our future career? A really interesting question there. What would be your advice on that?
I would desperately hope not. I would say that, we know from a legal perspective that mental health is protected in the UK. And, when I started working around mental health topics, I think the UK was as a country was in a very different place. And over the years, we've seen so much activity, particularly in the press, around creating a sense of fairness around talking about these things. William and Harry talked quite openly, publicly around mental health topics, and I think that also played a massive part over the last few years around creating a sense of normality around the topic. Like anything, there are always pockets of individuals who just don't get it. And it is difficult because for many people, they can see a broken leg, they can understand what a broken leg means, but if they've never experienced a mental health condition for themselves, they may struggle to really understand what that means. What I would say is that if there's a sense that it creates a negative impression in your workforce, then that's something definitely to talk openly to your work colleagues about, because it is protected. But it's also so important because it's a part of who we are, and the less that we talk about it, the more that these things become conditions that will exacerbate our ability to perform in our roles. But we do know that employees across the UK as a country find it very hard to talk to their employers. So if people are finding it difficult, then absolutely talk to a peer. If your organisation has mental health ambassadors, talk to those. But the most important thing really is to talk to somebody.
Okay, question here from Barrett West. Thanks, Helen. Very interesting. Have you found the problems of people experiencing with mental health issues to be worse because of the COVID-19 crisis? Has that exacerbated things, or is it too early to tell?
I think it's too early to tell from a statistical point of view of the number of people reaching out to our reactive health. And of course, that has a time lag because we keep a level of confidentiality around that. I think what has become very obvious very, very quickly is that people have switched to being comfortable about talking about how they're feeling in a way that we've never experienced before. And I think what's created that is that we are all in a shared experience that is having an emotional impact on absolutely everybody. What I think I have seen that I hadn't anticipated is the level of anxiety around people who are in that second group that I talked about, people who are living alone. I think it's very easy to think about the practical implications rather than the emotional implications of some of these things. And I think what it really does flush out is the assumptions we make about the way in which people cope. So, you know, I may be in mental health myself, but the reality is I'm wired the way that I'm wired. And so I've made certain assumptions, as we all do. And so I think it's too early to say whether it's really switching up conditions for individuals, but certainly it is creating that shared environment where people are talking about things more. And so it may be that where we think we're having an increase in the number of mental health conditions, what we're actually seeing is a higher level of openness and transparency about how people are feeling.
There's a question here from Chloe, which I know an awful lot of people are going to sympathise with. I'll read it out. How can I work around my kids who are driving me mad?
Well, I think, you know, the advice that we've given to our workforce is that there isn't a single answer for absolutely everybody. It has to be unique. And there's also something about creating a tolerance for everybody else. So I would say there is not a single meeting that I have been on where somebody's pet or child or partner has not popped in somewhere in the vicinity at some point. And being okay with that has created a real reduction in anxiety for people. So it's slightly different than whether your kids are driving you slightly up the wall, but trying not to over separate the two, I think, is quite important. If you have a day of meetings and your kids need to come in and out a little bit, agreeing with everybody on the call or on the video conference or whatever that might just be the case, and that you are really there, that's the normal that you're in, go with it, because the truth is your kids will struggle much more if you try and keep them out of the room, and you will ratchet up your own anxiety and they will ratchet up theirs. I am a single parent myself, so it's a fascinating environment where you can't hand it over to somebody else to deal with while you're off doing an important call. So for me, it's about really doing some deals with my child and sort of saying, you know, bribery has absolutely played a core role in the mental well-being that I have needed to create for myself. Bribery is a core part of it, but we must all find our own equilibrium on this one, I think.
I'm sure many people will empathise with the bribery aspect there. Brown paper envelopes or whatever it takes. Question here from Jim. How can we continue to be part of the West End family when we're not working and not travelling in every day?
Well, I'm not sure that's a question for me as much as it is for Jace, actually, but I think, you know, there is a reality, which is that when you think about the number of hours that we spend at work in a normal environment, our work colleagues are part of our extended family. They are part of our friendship groups, they're part of our social networks, you know, they are a core part of our everyday lives. And so, as I mentioned earlier, not having that part of your regular life has a massive impact on you emotionally, because it's part of your social engagement and your social interaction with people and your sense of identity. And so what I would say is that ensuring that even if you're not going in and seeing people or going to work, that doesn't mean you can't engage with people on a regular basis. So we are seeing more of a blur of the social interactions that people had with their friends happening with their colleagues now, you know, from work, because you realise how much you rely on the interaction of those people because they are part of your day-to-day lives. So what I would say is, you know, if you're missing those social interactions with work colleagues, then have them from a social perspective as well.
And join this webinar. We're going to be here every week, every Wednesday, and people can engage with their colleagues and the West End via this webinar. So do please join us and we'll keep you feeling part of the community. There's a question here from Katie Thomas. What is the most common challenge of mental health at work? Is it workload, environment, managing relationships? What would you say to that, Helen?
I would say that our experience would show that there is never one single cause, and whatever somebody presents with as their primary mental health concern, what they think it is, it's usually much more complex than one thing. It tends to be a combination of things that have created a tipping point where they then feel that they need to ask for help and they need support. And it's very difficult to determine, because in reality, if you are finding something in your personal life difficult and challenging, you don't leave that at the door when you come into work. You are the whole emotional self when you are in the workplace, and you can't, however much you want to, compartmentalize. And again, if you are struggling in the work environment, you don't leave that at the door when you walk into your house. And as such, really, I think what we see is that it becomes a build-up of pressure for individuals. It may be started by one thing, exacerbated by another, but there really isn't a pattern. And that is one of the biggest challenges about mental health. Unlike physical health, where we can see the most common issues, you can easily say it's stress, but actually, what is the root cause of that level of stress? Is it a personal circumstance at home, or is it, you know, not feeling they're succeeding in their job? And if we had the answer to what unlocked everybody's mental health and mental well-being, that would be great, but it is unique to every single one of us, and it is normally a combination of scenarios. And that is why talking therapies are so popular and so important. CBT is such an important aspect of mental health provision in this day and age, and why it's very difficult to create an environment where everybody can go to their manager and their manager can solve their problems, because actually we should never ask managers to take the place of a trained mental health provider. And as a mental health first aider myself, you know, recognizing I have a role to play, but in fact, I need to know where the boundary of that role is and hand somebody over to somebody with more expertise than myself, because of the level of complexity that makes up a mental health challenge. That's really, really important. So knowing that there is no single cause of mental health, there is no main cause of mental health, that it is a combination of situations for every individual is really important. So I can't give you the single answer for that one, I'm afraid.
No, completely understand that. Question here from James. Do you think the pandemic will fundamentally shift company policies and or have a lasting impact on working from home 4 days a week and a work-life balance when we approach the recovery stages?
Well, I think each company will have to work out what it means for them individually. I think when I think about us at Microsoft, I look at the way in which people have had to really go through a myriad of emotions, whether they wanted to work from home or didn't want to work from home. And we had, for many of us, that choice. The fact that we are in a lockdown scenario has meant that we've really had to adjust our own approach and our own thought processes. And we are definitely much more emotionally aware than we were before. I think if and when we go back to what was normal, I think normal will be different for all of us. And whether that's about the fact that we make different choices, you know, for some of us, it may be wanting to get out of the house to go to work every day and be much more present than we were. We may not want to work from home anymore. We may have had enough. And for some of us, actually, it may have created an environment where we realise that home is a really good place for us. It will be different for each of us. I do think that in organisations that have opened up the dialogue around mental health to help employees go through this current scenario, you won't be able to close those conversations down. That won't go away. I think that will become part of the new dialogue and the new normal. But I also think that we need to be prepared for the mental health implications of coming out of this. It's really hit people very, very hard to go into this scenario. And so for us to assume that coming out of it is going to be easy, I think would be wrong. I think an extended period of time where you have had to learn how to be on your own, how to change your social interactions, will take some time readjusting. And, you know, even to the point where when we stop having to social distance, that will create some really strange mental connections for individuals about what does that mean? You know, if they were a very huggy person, does that mean that that's no longer who they are? All of these things will change us, and all of the emotional networks that we had in place before, they may or may not be there when we come out the other side of this. And so we may have to re-establish some of those emotional networks. And for some people, they will have lost family members. And so coming out of the other side of this, they will also have to understand what that means for them from an emotional point of view. So I think some company policies may change. I think it will depend on the company. I think individuals may well change their view about what they want from a work-life balance. And I think we will most definitely need, as organisations, to stop and think about how we support people going into what will be a new normal. It won't be the old normal, it will be a new normal.
Good food for thought there. Let's hear now from Kate. Would you recommend recruiting wellbeing champions from your organisation?
I think it's certainly something that we've done. We call them our mental health ambassadors, and we trained them in as mental health first aiders as well. And we did it really in response to the statistics that say the vast majority of employees are not ever going to tell HR or their line manager that they are struggling with a mental health condition. And if you're in a scenario, however good the dialogue and whatever great culture you have, where that is a statistic of UK organisations, then creating a route where people can feel they can go and talk confidentially to somebody can only be a good thing. That's why we did it. I think it works well for us because it does enable people to go and have a confidential discussion with somebody just about how they're feeling, knowing that it will go nowhere unless they want it to, and knowing that that person has the information about those reactive support networks to advise them if they need it. And what that also does, what that community can also do really, is provide back to you as an organisation the themes and things that they're hearing. And so certainly my mental health ambassadors play that role for me, where they will come back and say, you know, right now, the vast majority of of people that are reaching out to us are saying that they just feel lonely, or that they are, you know, this time of year they're really struggling with a concern about this. And so when you start to see those themes and trends, that does enable you as an organisation to put something in a little bit more proactive, or perhaps communicate a little bit more broadly. So what I would say is it can't hurt, but wherever you put in a mental health champion, I think creating a support network around those champions themselves is really important. So not creating too many of them, creating enough that you can ensure you're checking in regularly, and that they don't take on the responsibilities and the emotions of everybody that comes to them. So you need to be able to support your mental health champions as much as they're supporting the community around them.
Got one last question here, I think, unless anybody else wants to put in their questions. It's not too late. But there's only one other question, I think, which is worth putting to Helen at the moment. If you do want to put one last question, get in there quick. You just need to click the question mark icon at the bottom of your window. But this question from David, I'm going to publish the whole of the question, but I'm going to put one specific part of it to Helen. And the bit that I would like you to give your thoughts to, Helen, is what would you recommend 0 hours contract staff should be doing, given the lack of certainty for them? I'm not sure that there's certainty for anybody, but particular lack of certainty, I think, is the point that David is raising there. Your thoughts, Helen?
I'm not sure I'm really in a position to answer that question, to be honest. I think it will depend on the unique circumstance of that individual person. I think, you know, the labour market is very volatile at the moment, and I think each individual person will have to look at their circumstance on their own on that one. I'm afraid I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer that.
No, fair enough. I wonder if whether you can give some thoughts to this one. It's a question from Peter. Obviously, we're hearing an awful lot about company closures. Biggest fear is that I will be made redundant, which makes it very difficult to keep positive. Any thoughts in terms of what you would be saying to somebody who's in that situation, as many people are?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's difficult because people are looking for certainty in times of uncertainty, and our work is often the thing we anchor certainty around, because it is our most reliable element of our lives, is the normalising aspect. And so it's not uncommon for this to be a topic that's top of people's minds. I think all we can do, and when you look at the mental health advice that's out there, it is to try and really focus on the things that are within your control. So you are not in control of whether or not your job will remain or not. You don't have the answer to that at present. The best ways to manage your own personal mental health really is to look at the things that are within your realms of control today, to manage those in a way that really gives you the right sense of equilibrium and looks after yourself in the best way that you know how. And then tomorrow we'll deal with tomorrow.
Okay, we've got another question here. It's actually from someone who is remaining anonymous, but the question is there a practice or initiative that you have put in place at Microsoft during this time which you are the most proud of or would suggest others adopt?
Most proud of the practice or initiative. I think from I'll give you two. I'll give you one which is a formal policy that we've put in place, and I think I mentioned it earlier around creating a formalised policy that enables people to flex their hours around their personal family needs in agreement with their line manager, because doing that informally is great, but what we've learned is doing it informally doesn't give people a sense of certainty about what the next few weeks might hold. So putting in a really structured policy would be great. I think the other thing that I'm proud of is the silliness, the silly sessions that we put in. And so really creating space for some silly sessions, be that bring your pet to work, which was one of mine, to having a theme of the day for all of your meetings. Those really do have a ridiculously positive impact on people's sense of well-being. So just finding some humour in your day-to-day activity.
Helen, we really appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed for taking part, for giving the presentation and addressing all those questions and answers. That is all we have time for today. You can, of course, share this webinar. You'll be able to do that shortly after we go off air via YouTube or via the LinkedIn page. There'll be links there which you'll be able to find via the normal Google searches. Obviously, if you're watching this after the event having taken place on the 15th of April between 4 and 5, you won't be able to answer or put any more questions because we have this is a recording that you're now watching. But if you have any ideas for guests or subjects that you would like to hear more on, do please let us know. I think the email should be appearing on that slide where you can contact us and let us know if you have any questions or subjects or guests that you would like us to get on. Our next session will be on Wednesday, the 22nd of April, the same time between 4 and 5 p.m. Our guest speaker will be Nikki Aiken, MP. She is MP for the cities of London and Westminster, and she'll be talking about the government and how it's supporting West End businesses and employees and what the reopening of the West End might look like. That is an opportunity to ask our West End MP any questions you may have on the current situation and how it's affecting the West End and the work that's being done to support the district now and of course in the future. But for now, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And thank you for being a part of this inaugural webinar. Keep safe. Goodbye.